Hi, this is Dan Funk from Spiffworks. I had a nice conversation with one of the people at Emerson, Christian, this morning, and we worked through how to test messages because they're using a lot of messages to send stuff back and forth, and it'd be nice to be able to test. And so we were playing around with a requestly, which is just a simple, looks a little scary, but a pretty simple interface that allows you to make API calls. So I thought I would create this very quick demo of how to test workflows inside of Spiff Arena by sending these API calls in. And it's pretty simple and straightforward. I think anybody could learn how to do it. I'm just going to step you through it real quick. So first, let's take a look at this process. So you see it's got two messages in here. There's a start message, and that's called core 1. And that is going to kick off the process. And then there is a follow-up message called core 2. And that has a correlation key associated with it, a matching condition. And what that means is that, like, what it's looking for here is an ID. So when we send a message into the start message, we should include an ID in there. And when we send the second message, we should include something that has the same ID. And this is kind of a cool aspect of messages. You could start 5,000 processes that were all this same BPMN, all based on the same BPMN file. So you could have hundreds or thousands of these processes running. But so long as the ID you send in is unique, it'll correlate and it'll make sure that only a process that was started with an ID of 1 will get a follow-up message with an ID of 1. And if it's got 500 as the ID that the start message, then it will only accept a message with an ID of 500 later on. And so you can have all of these messages running simultaneously. So let's just get to the interesting part. How do you test this? You can't click start here. It doesn't do anything. You really need to send a message in to start. So that's where requestly comes in. So this is just a plugin. I'll go ahead and no, let me save this thing. Make sure both of these things are saved. I'm just going to close it out so you know. But you can go add this to your Chrome browser or whatever browsers you have. And then once it's installed, you can kind of click and open it up. And I'll give you this pop-up. And I'm just going to say, I want to send an API request. And I've got two saved in here, the correlation message 1 and core 2. But let me just walk you through it real quick. There's only a handful of things you need to edit to be able to send this request. The first is the URL. So you want to make sure it's where you have the system hosted. So for me, it's spiffdemo.org for this test, and this process is out there, and you can test with this process if you'd like. And then the standard /API version 1.0 messages. So that all of this is kind of static. It will always be the same, and it will just vary. The only thing that will vary is where you're hosting it or where you're using Spiff Workflow. And then we just pass the message name in, core 1. There's an additional argument here of execution mode synchronous, and that just means we want it to execute right away and get as far as it can in the process before returning. It just means we're going to wait for that process to complete as much as it can. So that's it for the params. You can I'll put this in the notes of this video. You can just kind of take this and paste it straight in. And then headers, you need to specify a Spiff Workflow API key and a content type. Content type is always application JSON. And the Spiff Workflow API key, that's a key that you can generate if you have access to it by going to your user and clicking API keys, where it's also in some configurations up in this configuration panel, and you go there. But you generate a key inside the website, and then you can paste that there. And then that's it. So if I want to kick this off, I can just come into the body here. So this is what we're actually sending in, and I pass in an ID. So I'm going to start with an ID of 100, and I'm going to send that in. And when that executes, we're going to get a bunch of information back. I'll just pull this over, and it's really going to tell us, hey, that worked. It was successful. I received this data, that ID 100, and the process instance is 5772. So I'm just going to take that and go back to Spiff workflow and go to process instances and find by ID and put that 5772 in there. And there it is. And so the process did start, and now it's waiting for that follow-on message. And if we come over to Requestly, I've got that correlation 2 message all set up. And it's all the same things. It is a post, so it's always going to be a post to update the message. So just be sure that's what's selected in this drop-down list. It's the same for the first one. And then make sure your message name is correct. So that's the only change between the first one. And you can come over here and make copies by clicking on this and saying duplicate, which is how I created these two, the second one. So everything about the first one is in the second one. And then you want to make sure this ID matches up. Let's try it without matching it up. So we'll put an ID of 200 in there. And if we send this now, we should get an error message. So what comes back is, hey, there's nothing that's listening for a correlation 2 with an ID of 200. But if we change it and go back to 100 and send it, because we know there's that process out there waiting, we'll get back a success. And it matched up to that 5772, which is the right process instance. And if we come back over here and reload this page, we'll see that this process completed. Got the start message and the follow-on message. So now we're able to effectively test these message endpoints and know that they're working correctly. We can do that all inside of our browser. It's very simple and clean. If you run into any problems, you can also look at the messages tab over here, and it will show you every message that comes in. So everything that we just did was around 5772. Here's the message that we sent in from Requestly is right here. That caused, that matched up with a receive. So it created this process instance 5772, and then it starts to wait for a core 2 message. And here's where we sent that in. And you can see there's, a few seconds in between when we did one and did the next. And it's that simple. So yeah, give it a try. Check out Requestly. There's some other ones like, there's a few other systems out there that you can use, like Postman, I think is a very popular one, that work very much the same. Just remember, send a post message, get your URL right, make sure that your body contains that ID that you've set up as a correlation, and make sure you've got the right header values in there. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching.